You are listening to HOA Clapback. She said Tao on sight and she meant me. The handheld scanner beeped at my license plate and Karen yelled that the system said unauthorized, and she loved when the system agreed with her. I am calling security right now, she shouted, waving the scanner like it was a warrant. My brother's truck sat in my assigned guest spot with the pass right there on the dashboard where it belonged. But Helen Ramirez did not care about facts when she had a scanner that beeped. I work as a pest control technician in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I keep detailed service logs for every job, every route, every invoice. That habit saved me when Harbor Point Village Association decided I was the perfect target for their latest towing blitz. Helen ran the Fines and Enforcement Committee and she bragged about collections like it was a sport. She wore a red blazer with a badge clip that had nothing rateable on it, a pink sun hat that looked ridiculous in November, and she carried that handheld scanner everywhere like it was a holy relic. The system says this vehicle is not registered, Helen snapped. I already called the tow company. You have 5 minutes to move it or it goes to impound. I pulled out my phone and opened the email confirmation from 2 weeks ago when I submitted my brother's plate for guest access. The confirmation was right there with a timestamp and a reference number. I held the screen toward her and she did not even look. This conversation is not a debate. It is a directive, she said. Your pass was not displayed correctly. I pointed at the windshield. The pass is right there on the dashboard. Helen leaned in and squinted. It is facing the wrong direction, she said. The barcode must face outward for scanning compliance. I looked at the pass. The barcode was facing inward, but the printed side with the date and my unit number was facing out, which is how everyone displays them. I took a photo of the dashboard and the pass position. Helen crossed her arms. That does not matter. The scanner rejected it, so the vehicle is unauthorized. I will bury you in notices until you run out of printer ink. The tow truck driver climbed out of the cab and walked over with a magnetic tow authorization placard in his hand. He flashed it toward Helen and she nodded like they were in this together. He did not say a word to me, just walked to the back of my brother's truck and crouched to check the hitch. I stepped between him and the truck. My brother is visiting from out of state and he leaves tomorrow morning. This is a valid guest spot, and I have a valid pass. The driver shrugged. Lady says it is unauthorized. I do the paperwork later. I am hooking it up now. I pulled up the HOA parking rules PDF on my phone and scrolled to the guest pass section. Guest vehicles with a valid pass displayed on the dashboard are permitted in designated guest spots for up to 72 consecutive hours. I read it out loud. Helen rolled her eyes. That rule was updated last month. All guest passes now require barcode outward positioning for scanner compliance. I asked where that update was posted. She waved her hand vaguely. It was in the newsletter. I get the newsletter every week by email and I save every single one in a folder. I opened the folder and scrolled through October and November. There was no mention of barcode positioning anywhere. Show me the updated rule, I said. Helen smirked. I do not have to show you anything. The board approved it, and that is all you need to know. The tow driver hooked a chain under the rear axle and started cranking the hand winch. My brother came out of my unit and stopped when he saw the truck half hooked. What is happening? He asked. I explained quickly. He looked at Helen. I am leaving at 6 in the morning and I need my truck. Helen pointed at him. You should have parked off property. This is private HOA parking. He looked at me. I thought you said I could park here. I said he could, and he can. Helen stepped closer. If you two do not move, I am calling the police for interference. I told my brother to get his keys and registration and meet me inside. He jogged back to my unit. I turned to the tow driver. If you take this truck, I am filing a complaint with the state towing authority for improper authorization." He paused and looked at Helen. "She got the notice," he said. "That is all I need." I shook my head. "You need a signed authorization from the property owner or a valid violation posted on the vehicle. Show me either one." He did not have anything. Helen pulled a folded paper from her blazer pocket and handed it to him. "There is your authorization," she said. I asked to see it. She refused. "That is HOA internal documentation," she said. "You do not have access." The tow driver unfolded the paper and glanced at it, then folded it again and stuffed it in his pocket. He walked back to the winch and kept cranking. I took another photo, this time of him cranking the chain with Helen standing there smirking. A dog walker across the parking lot stopped and pulled out their phone, filming from a safe distance. Helen noticed and yelled at them, "Stop recording. This is private property." The dog walker did not stop. Helen turned back to me. "You are going to pay the tow fee, the impound fee, the storage fee, and the administrative fee. It will be about $600 by tomorrow morning. Then you will get a fine for improper guest parking. That is another $250. And if you do not pay within 10 days, we will file a lien on your unit." I did not raise my voice, because my proof was louder than any argument. I opened my email app and forwarded the guest pass confirmation, the parking rules PDF, and the last 3 HOA newsletters to my own records folder with a timestamp. Then I sent a text to my attorney asking for a quick consult on HOA towing procedures. Helen watched me typing and her smile faded a little. "What are you doing?" she asked. "I am making a record," I said. She laughed. "Good luck with that." The driver finished cranking and the truck's rear wheels lifted completely off the ground. He walked to the cab and started the engine. I stepped in front of the tow truck and held up my phone. "I am recording this. If you leave with that truck, I am reporting this to the police as theft." The driver stopped. Helen yelled at me to move. "I am not moving until you show me a valid authorization signed by someone with actual authority." The driver looked at Helen. She pulled out her phone and dialed. "Yes, I need police at Harbor Point Village, parking lot B. We have someone interfering with a valid HOA tow." 2 police officers arrived about 10 minutes later. One of them asked Helen to explain the situation. She launched into a speech about unauthorized vehicles and scanner compliance, and how I was interfering with HOA enforcement. The officer asked to see the authorization. Helen handed him the folded paper. He read it and frowned. "This is just a printed email from you to the tow company saying to remove the vehicle. That is not a legal authorization." Helen argued that as the enforcement coordinator, she had full authority to order tows. The officer shook his head. "You need either a signed complaint from the property owner, which is the HOA board as a whole, or a posted notice on the vehicle giving the owner a chance to move it. You have neither." Helen's face turned red. "The HOA board delegated enforcement authority to my committee. We do not need individual board signatures for every tow." The officer turned to me. "Do you live here?" I said yes and showed him my driver's license with my unit address. He asked if the truck belonged to me. I explained it was my brother's and he was visiting with a valid guest pass. The officer walked to the truck and looked at the dashboard. "The pass is displayed," he said. Helen interrupted. "It is facing the wrong direction." The officer looked at her. "There is no law about which direction a parking pass faces. If it is visible and valid, it is displayed." The officer told the tow driver to lower the truck. The driver hesitated and looked at Helen. "Lower it," the officer repeated. The driver climbed out and started reversing the winch. Helen pulled out her phone and started typing furiously. She looked at me. You just made this 10 times worse for yourself. I am filing an emergency board complaint, and you will be banned from all amenities effective immediately." The officer raised his hand. "Ma'am, you cannot retaliate against a resident for asserting their rights." She ignored him and kept typing. The truck settled back onto the pavement, and the driver unhooked the chain. He coiled it up and tossed it in the truck bed without a word. Helen pointed at me. "This is not over. The board will hear about this tonight, and you will get a formal notice tomorrow." I asked the officer if I could file a report. He said I could file a harassment complaint if the HOA continued targeting me without valid cause. I took his card and thanked him. Helen stormed off toward the HOA office building across the lot. The dog walker was still filming from a distance. I waved at them and they gave a thumbs up. My brother came back out and stared at his truck. "That was insane," he said. I told him welcome to Harbor Point Village Association. He asked if this kind of thing happened a lot. I said it started about 6 months ago when the board hired a new management company that brought in Helen as enforcement coordinator. Before that, the HOA was sleepy and boring. Now it was a revenue machine. Helen processed more fines in her first 3 months than the previous board did in 2 years. She loved it. That night, I sat down and built a spreadsheet. I listed every interaction with Helen, every email, every notice, every fee threat. I had the guest pass confirmation, the parking rules PDF, the newsletters, the photos from tonight, the police officer's card, and the video the dog walker sent me. I also had something Helen did not know about. 2 months ago, I filed a state records complaint with the county because the HOA refused to provide meeting minutes for the last 6 months. The county sent them a formal demand, and the HOA never responded. That gave me leverage, but I was not ready to use it yet. The next morning, I found a notice taped to my door. It was printed on HOA letterhead with Helen's name at the bottom. Violation notice, improper guest parking, interference with enforcement procedures, verbal abuse of HOA personnel. Fine total, $750. Payment due within 10 days or a lien will be filed against your property. I took a photo of the notice and added it to my spreadsheet. Then I called my attorney. He listened to the whole story and laughed. "They are going to regret this," he said. "Keep every piece of paper and do not pay a cent until I tell you." I went to work that day and tried to focus on my route. I do pest control for commercial properties, mostly restaurants and warehouses, and I keep a log of every service call with timestamps and photos. It is second nature to document everything. When I got home that evening, another notice was taped to my door. This one said I was banned from using the pool, the clubhouse, the gym, and the tennis courts pending resolution of my enforcement violations. I took another photo and added it to the file. Helen was escalating exactly the way I expected. She wanted me to either pay up and shut up or fight back so she could bury me in more fines. I chose option 3. I printed copies of every document in my file and mailed them to the HOA board president with a certified mail receipt. I included a cover letter asking for a formal hearing to dispute the fines and requesting copies of all updated parking rules, enforcement policies, and board meeting minutes for the last 6 months. I sent a second copy to the management company. Then I waited. 3 days later, I got a call from the management company. A woman named Diane introduced herself as the regional supervisor. She said she reviewed my complaint and wanted to schedule a meeting. I asked if Helen would be there. Diane said Helen would attend as the enforcement coordinator, but Diane would run the meeting. I agreed to meet the following Tuesday at the HOA office. If you are enjoying this story, smash that like button and subscribe for more HOA chaos, because this is just getting started. That weekend, my brother called and asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine and explained what I was doing. He said he felt bad for causing trouble. I told him it was not his fault. Helen would have found another excuse to target me eventually. This just gave her the opening she wanted. He asked if I needed help with the legal fees. I said my attorney was handling it on contingency because he loved cases like this. When an HOA overreaches this badly, the law is crystal clear and the settlement almost always covers fees. Monday morning, I checked my mailbox and found another notice. This one was different. It had a red border and bold print at the top. Final notice, payment required within 48 hours. Failure to pay will result in immediate lien filing and legal action. Amount due, $750 plus a $150 late fee. Total, $900. I laughed out loud. Helen was padding the fees now, hoping I would panic and pay. I took a photo and emailed it to my attorney. He replied in 5 minutes. Do not pay. See you at the meeting tomorrow. Tuesday arrived, and I walked to the HOA office at 10 in the morning. My attorney met me outside. He carried a briefcase and wore a suit, which felt like overkill for an HOA meeting, but he said it set the tone. We walked in together and found Diane waiting in a small conference room. Helen sat across the table with a laptop open and a stack of printed photos in front of her. A third woman sat beside Helen, holding a phone pointed at me. I asked who she was. Helen said she was a volunteer documenting the meeting for HOA records. My attorney said that was fine as long as we could record too. He pulled out a small voice recorder and set it on the table. Diane started by summarizing my complaint. She confirmed that I submitted a valid guest pass request 2 weeks before my brother's visit, that the pass was approved and displayed on the dashboard, and that Helen ordered a tow without posting a violation notice on the vehicle. Helen interrupted. The vehicle was not in compliance with updated scanner protocol. Diane asked to see the updated rule. Helen opened her laptop and scrolled for a minute. She pulled up a document dated 3 weeks ago and turned the screen toward Diane. Diane read it and frowned. This is a draft proposal from your committee. It was never voted on by the board. Helen's face flushed. The board delegated enforcement updates to my committee. We do not need a vote for procedural changes. Diane shook her head. Parking rules require a board vote and resident notice before they take effect. You cannot create a new rule and enforce it retroactively. Helen slammed her hand on the table. This is exactly the problem. Residents think they can do whatever they want and hide behind technicalities. Diane stayed calm. It is not a technicality. It is the governing documents you agreed to enforce. My attorney leaned forward. We would like copies of all board meeting minutes for the last 6 months, all enforcement policy updates, and a full breakdown of the fines assessed against my client. Diane nodded. I can provide those. Helen cut in. Some of those documents are privileged board communications. My attorney smiled. HOA meeting minutes are not privileged. They are required to be available to all residents under Pennsylvania law. If you do not provide them, we will file a formal records complaint with the state. Diane looked at Helen. We already received a records demand from the county 2 months ago. Did you respond? Helen hesitated. We are working on it. My attorney opened his briefcase and pulled out a printed copy of the county demand letter. The deadline was 60 days ago, he said. You are in violation of state law. Helen stood up. This meeting is over. I do not have to sit here and be accused of breaking the law. Diane held up her hand. Sit down, Helen. We are going to resolve this today. Helen sat, but her jaw was tight and her hands were clenched. Diane turned to me. I am going to recommend that the board rescind all fines related to this incident and issue a formal apology. My attorney said that was a good start, but we also wanted a written policy change requiring posted notices before any tow, and a refund of any costs my client incurred. Diane agreed. Helen shook her head. I am not signing off on that. Diane looked at her. You do not have the authority to block this. The board will vote on it at the next meeting. Helen grabbed her stack of printed photos and slid them across the table toward Diane. These are photos of other violations at his unit. Unauthorized decorations, trash cans visible from the street, a garden hose left out overnight. He is a serial violator, and he needs to be held accountable. My attorney picked up the stack and flipped through them. These photos are all from the last 2 weeks after he filed his complaint. This is textbook retaliation. Diane took the photos and looked at each one. She shook her head. None of these are violations under the current rules. Trash cans are allowed as long as they are stored behind the unit, which these are. Decorations are allowed as long as they are not offensive, and a wreath on the door is not offensive. A garden hose is not mentioned anywhere in the rules. Helen's volunteer stopped recording and set the phone down. She whispered something to Helen. Helen whispered back and then stood up. I need to make a phone call. Diane told her to sit down. Helen ignored her and walked out of the room. The volunteer followed. Diane sighed. I apologize for this. Helen has been overzealous, and the board should have reined her in months ago. My attorney asked if we could get the board vote scheduled within the week. Diane said she would call an emergency meeting for Friday. We left the office and my attorney shook my hand. You handled that perfectly. Do not engage with Helen until after the vote. She is going to try to provoke you into doing something stupid. I promised I would stay calm. He drove off and I walked home. When I got to my unit, I found another notice taped to the door. Emergency parking inspection scheduled for tomorrow at 8 in the morning. All vehicles must display current registration and valid permits. Any vehicle found in violation will be towed immediately. I took a photo and texted it to my attorney. He called me back 2 minutes later. This is harassment. I am filing an emergency injunction to block any tows until the board votes. Do not move your car, do not hide anything, just document everything she does tomorrow. I said I would. That night, I could not sleep. I kept replaying the meeting in my head. Helen was losing control, and that made her dangerous. She had power, a willing tow company, and a volunteer crew who followed her orders without question. If she decided to escalate before the board vote, I needed to be ready. I spent 2 hours organizing my files and printing a second set of everything. I put one set in a binder and left it on my kitchen counter. I put the second set in my car. If anything disappeared from my unit, I would still have proof. 8 in the morning, I heard footsteps outside my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Helen walking through the parking lot with a clipboard and the handheld scanner. The volunteer from the meeting followed behind her with a phone camera. I grabbed my phone and my tire chalk stick and stepped outside. Helen looked up and smiled. Good morning. We are conducting a parking compliance audit today. Please confirm that your vehicle has a current registration sticker and a valid resident parking decal. I walked to my car and pointed at the windshield. Both are displayed right there. Helen scanned the decal with her handheld device. It beeped 3 times and then made a low buzz. She frowned. The system is showing an expired decal. I need to see your registration paperwork. I opened my car door and pulled the registration from the glove box. I handed it to her. She glanced at it and handed it back. This does not match the decal number in the system. Your decal is invalid. I am issuing a violation, and your vehicle will be towed within 24 hours unless you purchase a new decal. I asked how much a new decal cost. $50, she said, plus a $15 processing fee. I asked why the system showed my decal as expired when I just renewed it 3 months ago. She shrugged. System errors are the resident's responsibility. You should have verified it when you received the decal. I took a photo of my windshield showing the decal and the registration sticker. Then I took a photo of Helen holding the scanner. She stepped back. You cannot photograph me without permission. I said I was documenting an HOA interaction on my own property. She turned to the volunteer. Make sure you get him on camera refusing to cooperate. The volunteer zoomed in on my face. I smiled and waved. Helen marked something on her clipboard and walked to the next car. I watched her scan 4 more vehicles in my row. Every single one beeped and buzzed. She marked every single one as a violation. I called my attorney and left a voicemail describing what just happened. Then I texted the dog walker who filmed the tow truck incident and asked if they saw the parking audit. They replied 2 minutes later. Yes, I am watching from my balcony. She is marking every car in the lot. This is insane. I asked if they could record it. They sent me a thumbs up emoji. Helen finished the row and walked toward the next section. I followed at a distance. She did not acknowledge me, but the volunteer kept the camera pointed my direction. Helen scanned another 10 cars and marked all of them. A neighbor came out of his unit and asked what was happening. Helen told him his decal was expired, and he needed to pay for a new one or his car would be towed. He argued that he just paid his HOA dues last month, and the decal was included. Helen said the decal fee was separate. He asked where that was written. She pointed at her clipboard. In the updated fee schedule approved last board meeting, he asked to see a copy. She said it was posted on the HOA website. I went home and checked the HOA website. There was no updated fee schedule. I took a screenshot showing the last update was 8 months ago. Then I checked my email for any board meeting notices. The last meeting notice was 6 weeks ago, and it did not mention a fee schedule change. I added all of this to my file. By noon, Helen had marked almost every car in the complex. The neighborhood group chat was exploding with angry messages. People were asking if this was legal, if they had to pay, if the tow trucks were really coming. I posted a message explaining that the board had not voted on a new fee schedule and that Helen was acting outside her authority. I included a link to the state HOA law website. Helen saw the message and replied directly to me. Spreading false information about HOA enforcement is a violation of community standards. You will receive a separate fine for this. My attorney called me back an hour later. I just filed the injunction. The judge signed it 10 minutes ago. No tows can happen until after the board meeting Friday. I am emailing a copy to the management company and the tow company right now. If Helen tries to tow anyone, she is in contempt of court. I thanked him and posted the news in the group chat. The reaction was instant. People were thanking me, asking how they could help, offering to attend the board meeting. Helen did not reply. Wednesday and Thursday passed without any new notices. I went to work, came home, and kept my head down. I knew Helen was planning something, but I did not know what. Friday morning, I woke up early and put on a clean shirt. The board meeting was at 7 in the evening, and I wanted to be ready. My attorney said he would meet me there at 6:30. At 6, I walked to the HOA office and found a crowd already gathering outside. At least 30 residents were waiting, most of them holding printed copies of the parking audit notices. A few people recognized me and came over to thank me for the group chat post. One woman asked if I was the guy who got the injunction. I said yes. She shook my hand. You saved me $300. My husband and I both got violation notices and we were about to pay just to avoid the hassle. My attorney arrived and we went inside. The meeting room was packed. Every chair was full and people were standing along the walls. Helen sat at the front table with 3 board members. Diane stood beside her with a folder. My attorney and I took seats in the second row. Helen looked at me, and her expression was ice. Diane called the meeting to order and read the agenda. The first item was my complaint. She summarized everything that happened, including the invalid tow attempt, the retaliation notices, the parking audit, and the injunction. She recommended that the board rescind all fines against me, issue a written apology, and adopt a new policy requiring posted notices before any tow. She also recommended suspending the parking audit and refunding any fees collected under the invalid fee schedule. Helen stood up. I object to this entire process. This resident has harassed me, defied enforcement procedures, and poisoned the community against HOA leadership. He should be fined, not rewarded. Diane asked her to sit down. Helen refused. I demand a vote to remove this item from the agenda. One of the board members raised his hand. I second that motion. Diane shook her head. The motion is out of order. This is a formal complaint, and the board is required to address it. My attorney stood up. I would like to present additional evidence. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and handed copies to each board member. These are certified mail receipts showing that my client requested HOA records 6 months ago, 3 months ago, and again last month. All 3 requests were ignored. Under Pennsylvania law, an HOA must provide records within 30 days. Your failure to comply is a violation of state law, and my client has grounds to file a lawsuit for damages. The board members read the documents in silence. One of them looked at Helen. Did you receive these requests? Helen crossed her arms. I forwarded them to the management company. Diane opened her own folder and pulled out a printed email. You forwarded the first request and then marked the next 2 as spam. Helen's face went red. That was a clerical error. Diane shook her head. It was a pattern. You have been blocking records requests because you know the board votes are not valid. One of the board members leaned forward. What do you mean the votes are not valid? Diane took a breath. I reviewed the meeting minutes for the last 6 months. 3 of the enforcement votes happened without a quorum. Under your bylaws, a quorum is 4 board members. 2 of those meetings only had 3 members present. The room went silent. Then everyone started talking at once. People were yelling questions, demanding explanations, asking if all the fines were invalid. Diane raised her voice. The board will address this after we resolve the current complaint. My attorney leaned over to me. This is even better than I thought. If the votes were invalid, every fine Helen issued is unenforceable. I smiled. I know. Helen grabbed the microphone from the table. You want to talk about records? Let us talk about records. I have a recording of this resident threatening me during the tow incident. She pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. A voice played over the speaker. If you take this truck, I am filing a complaint with the State Towing Authority for improper authorization. Helen paused the recording. That is a threat of legal action intended to intimidate HOA personnel. My attorney laughed out loud. That is not a threat. That is a statement of fact. My client has every right to file a complaint. Helen played more of the recording. I am not moving until you show me a valid authorization. She paused it again. He obstructed a lawful tow. My attorney shook his head. The police were present, and they determined the tow was not lawful. Do you have a recording of that part? Helen did not answer. She sat down and stared at the table. Diane addressed the board. I recommend a full audit of all enforcement actions taken in the last 6 months. Any fines issued after a meeting without a quorum should be rescinded. Any fees collected should be refunded. And I recommend removing Helen from the enforcement coordinator position immediately." One board member nodded. I moved to accept those recommendations. Another board member seconded. The vote was 3-1 in favor. Helen was the only one who voted no. Helen stood up and grabbed her bag. "This is a witch hunt. I have done nothing but enforce the rules and protect property values. You are all going to regret this when the neighborhood turns into a free-for-all." She walked out of the room. The volunteer with the camera followed her. The room stayed silent for a few seconds. Then someone started clapping. Others joined in. I did not clap. I just sat there feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Diane asked if I wanted to say anything. I stood up. "I just want to make sure this does not happen to anyone else. HOA boards have a lot of power, and that power needs oversight. If residents do not have access to records, if votes happen without a quorum, if enforcement is used as retaliation, then the whole system breaks down. I am glad the board voted to fix this, but it should not have taken 6 months and a lawsuit threat to get here." A few people nodded. My attorney put his hand on my shoulder. "Well said." The meeting ended and people came up to thank me. One man asked if I was running for the board. I said no. Another woman asked if I would help her file a complaint about a fine she got 3 months ago. I gave her my attorney's card. He could help her figure out if the fine was valid or not. I walked home with my attorney and he congratulated me. "You won," he said. "The board is going to refund your fees, rescind the fines, and probably settle for a few $1,000s to avoid a lawsuit. Plus Helen is out." I asked what would happen to her. He shrugged. "She will probably move to another HOA and do the same thing until someone stops her again." 2 weeks later, I received a check in the mail from the HOA. It was for $1,200, covering the legal fees I paid my attorney for the injunction and the initial consult. The letter attached said the board voted to settle my complaint in full and apologized for the inconvenience. It also said the enforcement policies were being rewritten and would be shared with all residents for comment before any vote. I deposited the check and filed the letter with the rest of my documents. I thought that was the end of it, but Helen had one more move. A week later, I got a text from the dog walker. "Helen is running for a board seat in the next election. She is telling people she was forced out by a conspiracy and she wants to take back control." I showed the text to my attorney. He laughed. "Let her run. After what happened, no one is going to vote for her." I was not so sure. HOA elections are weird. Turnout is usually low and the people who show up are either die-hard rule followers or people with an axe to grind. Helen had both. She spent the next month campaigning hard. She knocked on doors, sent emails, posted flyers with no readable text, and showed up at every board meeting to complain about the new policies. She even started a petition to recall the current board president. A former management company employee who left the company a year ago reached out to me through the neighborhood group chat. Her name was Lisa, and she said she recognized the scheme. Helen used the same playbook at her last 2 HOA assignments. She would rack up fines, push for aggressive enforcement, and then bail before the lawsuits started. Lisa said Helen had been fired from both previous jobs for ethics violations. She offered to testify if I needed her. I thanked her and saved her contact info. Election day came and I voted. I had no idea who would win. The results were posted the next evening. Helen lost by 18 votes. The new board had 5 members and none of them were her allies. I felt like I could finally breathe. The nightmare was over. But the neighborhood was not done with Helen. Someone leaked Lisa's testimony to the group chat. People were furious. A group of residents filed a joint complaint with the state HOA Oversight Board accusing Helen of fraud, retaliation, and misuse of HOA funds. The investigation took 3 months, but the findings were damning. Helen had approved over $50,000 in tow fees to a vendor that gave her a kickback for every tow. She had also created fake violation notices to justify the tows. The state board fined her personally and banned her from serving on any HOA board in Pennsylvania for 5 years. The HOA board voted to sue the tow company for the kickback scheme. The case settled out of court, and the HOA recovered $30,000. That money was used to refund every bogus fine Helen issued over the last year. I got a check for $900, covering the fines she tried to charge me. I framed the check instead of cashing it. It felt like a trophy. Helen moved out of Harbor Point 6 months later. No one knew where she went, and no one cared. The new board implemented a transparency policy requiring all meeting minutes to be posted online within 48 hours. They also created an appeals process so residents could challenge fines without hiring an attorney. It was not perfect, but it was better. I stayed in my unit and kept doing my job. Pest control is steady work, and I like the routine. I still keep detailed logs of every service call, every invoice, every interaction. That habit saved me once, and I am not going to stop now. The neighborhood is quieter these days. People still complain about parking and noise and trash, but it does not feel like a war anymore. The HOA is just an HOA again, boring and bureaucratic, the way it should be. Looking back, I think the scariest part was not the fines or the tow truck or even the retaliation. It was realizing how easy it is for one person with a little bit of power to make life miserable for everyone around them. Helen was not evil. She was just petty and vindictive, and she found a system that rewarded her worst instincts. If I had not kept records, if I had not pushed back, if I had just paid the fines and moved on, she would still be there doing the same thing to someone else. The dog walker who filmed the tow truck incident moved away last year, but we still keep in touch. They sent me a message on the anniversary of the board meeting. 1 year since you took down the parking enforcer from hell. Cheers to you. I replied with a beer emoji. It felt good to be remembered for something other than a pest control invoice. My brother visits every few months, and he always parks in the guest spot with a valid pass displayed. No one hassles him anymore. The handheld scanners are gone. The new enforcement coordinator is a retired teacher who walks the lot once a week and leaves polite notes if someone is parked incorrectly. It is a completely different vibe. I still see the magnetic tow authorization placard sometimes when a tow truck shows up for a legitimate breakdown or a vehicle that has been abandoned for weeks. It does not trigger me anymore. It is just a piece of metal on a clipboard. The tow drivers are different now, too. The predatory vendor Helen used lost their contract, and the new company actually follows the rules. The biggest change is the board itself. 3 of the 5 members are people who got targeted by Helen and fought back. They know what it is like to be on the wrong end of an HOA power trip, and they are careful not to repeat it. Meetings are open, records are available, and votes are recorded with a quorum every single time. I learned a lot from this whole mess. I learned that documentation is power. I learned that HOA boards can be reformed if enough people care. I learned that bullies like Helen rely on fear and isolation, and the moment residents start talking to each other and comparing notes, the whole scheme falls apart. I also learned that a good attorney who loves HOA cases is worth every penny. The refinance I was trying to do finally went through last month, No liens, no holes, no drama. The bank did not even blink when they pulled the HOA records. Clean slate. I closed on a lower rate and saved $200 a month. That money goes straight into a savings account I call the Helen Fund. If another enforcer shows up and tries the same thing, I will be ready. People ask me sometimes if I regret not moving out when things got bad. I thought about it, sure, but moving would have felt like letting Helen win. I did not want to be the guy who ran away from an HOA bully. I wanted to be the guy who stood his ground, kept his receipts, and made the system work the way it is supposed to work. That mattered to me more than avoiding the hassle. The neighborhood group chat is still active, but the tone is different now. Instead of panic and complaints, it is mostly people organizing potlucks, sharing contractor recommendations, and posting photos of their dogs. It is boring in the best way. Every once in a while, someone new moves in and asks about parking rules, and 5 people jump in with detailed explanations and links to the updated policies. It is a small thing, but it shows how much has changed. Helen tried to bury me in notices until I ran out of printer ink. Instead, I buried her in certified mail receipts and a clean paper trail of notices and responses. And when I filed a formal records complaint and attached the proof so the board could not hide it, the entire enforcement wave collapsed because the board votes happened without a quorum, so the entire enforcement wave was invalid. The funny part is that Karen insisted it was a fire lane issue, and the actual curb markings and ordinance proved she was wrong. And when her own quote played on speaker during the final showdown at my front porch when Karen showed up with an inspection clipboard and a tow vendor on speaker, she got so embarrassed she stopped talking mid-sentence. The HOA ended up paying my filing fees to settle the fight, and I walked away with a refund, an apology, and the satisfaction of knowing I did it the right way. I will be back with another HOA story soon.